She's keeper for that.
You all good to start on Facebook?
Yep.
Bless you.
Okay, you're good to go. All right, good morning. We are convening this special meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee, or is it a continued meeting, special meeting? Special meeting. To follow up on our discussions at our last meeting around initial recommendations for Affordable Housing Services Program, funds that will be recommended to the County Commission. So made a lot of progress at the last meeting, and there were a couple of outstanding decisions that we didn't quite get across the finish line, so we wanted to try to do that this morning. So, Matt, turn it over to you.
Sure, and this presentation will be brief to leave as much time as we can for discussion. Again, the summary of the funding available from general fund transfer, some allocations that exist for the Laurelwood project, unallocated funds, as well as unallocated program income through March 31st of this year. That was kind of the cutoff date that we're using, though some additional program income will come in later in the year. Leaves $3,883,641 to budget towards the requests. The requests exceed the budgeted amount by just over $5 million. As a reminder, these are the applications we received, including 5 for new construction of multifamily, 2 down payment assistance for units for sale, 3 emergency repair grant requests, and 1 housing authority request for a new start. And with that, I'm happy to open the workbook that you were kind of working with at last meeting to discuss the allocation options.
Great.
And I will share that screen. Take just a moment to get that adjusted. And these were the funding amounts that had been kind of tentatively put in place across the categories. Since that time, there were some questions that were asked of various applicants. We received those and forwarded those on to you, as well as looked at unit impacts and revisited with both Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity and MHO on their emergency repair programs, what the unit impacts would look like at both the proposed funding levels, looking at them proportionally, if you funded one fully or the other, just to give you that information, and shared that with you as well in the time between last meeting and today's. And that is all we have, and open it to discussion about allocations.
All right, great. Okay, thanks, Matt. So we, I think that, one of the main items we wanted to spend some more time on were there's 3 emergency home repair programs that were proposed, and one of them has an ARPA application in, so there's another opportunity to look at that program through that pool of funds. 2 of them don't, with Habitat and housing. So we talked about investing maybe $500,000 between the 2 programs, and but also needed to decide the ratio of the 2. So staff shared a couple different kind of options for how that could be looked at, from just sort of 50-50 or proportional funding relative to the ask, and then there's some other scenarios too. So thanks for doing that analysis. It didn't give us a recommendation, so it didn't tell us like you should do this one. So we still have to wrestle with it. So, I kind of lean towards doing like a 50-50 or something closer to that. That's kind of where I came down. And it looked like the number of units number of households that would be helped there are some differences, but they're pretty close. I don't know. I guess that's kind of my starting point for thinking about it. Parker, Amanda, y'all have some thoughts around which of those different scenarios you would like to kind of focus on some more in our discussion today?
Yeah, I was kind of leaning toward alternative 3, which is the 200,000 to Habitat and 300 to MHO, just because it does allow us to have the greatest household impact in terms of numbers of units. That's 92 versus the others. And I mean, they're close in terms of the other alternatives, but I'd rather go all in and reach as many as possible.
Okay. Parker, what are your thoughts? And I think you're muted. Hey, Parker, we can't hear you. Are you muted?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. I'm on my phone. Yeah, the audio is on my phone. So I'm not seeing an alternative 3, but I guess to answer your question, I guess I hope we would do as close to what we did last year for consistency purposes, which I think was kind of divvy the money up between the two based on the quantity of units. But, you know, it all shakes out pretty close to the same.
Parker, I found that the alternative 3 is in the memo that Matt sent out to us yesterday.
And actually, I sent out a revised one this morning. I apologize. We were trying to get some clarification.
I missed the revised.
We're trying to get some clarification from Habitat on the impact. And so there's a revised memo. The unit counts are lower across the board because of the way that Habitat utilizes our funding as part of its overall project mix.
We could pull up that info since it was just updated this morning.
Yes.
Just kind of look at each of the
Happy to pull that up.
each of those options.
One moment.
Yes, I definitely appreciate that update because that changes my thought process. And I
Sorry.
apologize. I missed that this morning.
We had a short time frame and we wanted to make sure we got the most accurate information as soon as we could.
Absolutely.
So apologize
We
for that
appreciate that.
change. Just 1 second. I'll get it. And I'll share that screen. Make sure. This is the corrected, updated version. And I'm happy to walk through that. So alternative 1 at 250,000 to each applicant results in a 69 unit or household impact. Alternative 2, which is proportional, so you take kind of their total ask and you take it as a proportion of the original ask and multiply it by 500,000, would support 72 units or households impacted. Alternative 3, which is fully funding MHO's request, would result in 66 units being impacted. And alternative 4, which fully supports Habitat's request, would result in 81 units being impacted, but a very small allocation to MHO. Again, the programs are different. The populations that they serve are different, and their merits certainly both, but wanted to make sure that we kind of looked at maximizing across the perspective. The reason Habitat's funding is all to direct assistance, and their per unit request from the county is slightly lower than MHO's. So their changes to their allocation has a larger impact just because it's a smaller amount per unit, if that makes sense.
Let me ask this though, in terms of the two programs, I mean, I agree. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like, obviously we want to help as many households as possible, right? But does the MHO program provide a bit more assistance per household? So in a way, it's like maybe they're touching less units, but there's actually a bit more improvements being done, and that should be kind of factored into the thinking too.
Right, and so their request, Habitat's model is looking at $6,100 on average per unit. MHO's is gonna, let me just verify it. Looking at the numbers before I confirm, I think it's right around 9,000, and a portion of that, about 4%, is admin. But let me just verify the amount. Yeah, so it's 9,090, and I think it's 0.458. So around 400 of that is for admin. So it's per unit investment is larger. However, Habitat puts additional funding in with theirs, so we're not paying for the full repair. So it's just kind of a different model in each case, different population served. Both certainly have merits. But in eye of the goal of unit servicing, we wanted to make sure that those decisions were informed by ultimately kind of the units, the direct assistance impact. So that information we wanted to just share as you considered how to allocate between the projects.
And to Parker's question, could you give us a reminder on how much was allocated to each program in the previous year's budget?
Let me take a look. Habitat's emergency repair allocation was 205,625. MHO's was 202,943.
202?
Yes, so 205 to Habitat and 202 to MHO. So very similar. And the unit impacts those two allocations were units for Habitat and 27 for MHO.
Okay. Do we all have the updated, does everybody have the updated, I mean, it's on the screen too, but
Yes.
to make sure everyone can see that. All right, so just have to make a decision on this. It's
Matt, would it be I guess would it be fair to say that alternative 2 is most similar to what we did last year?
Switch back there. Running between a couple screens.
Yeah.
Hold on
I
one
mean,
moment.
alternative 1 would kind of be closest to what we did last year, right? Because we basically funded them at like a very close, like almost exactly the same amount.
Alternative 1 is the
Okay.
most. And that isn't the lowest impact to units out of the 4 scenarios we provided. So it's in that moderate range of impact.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, I mean, if there's kind of, some sense that like, there's some support for 1 and some support for the 2, or like in the updated, it would be 2, right? Like kind of the relative to the request. I mean, honestly, we could also just kind of do something in between those 2, right? So it would be a somewhat larger allocation to the Habitat proposal, but kind of somewhere in between the 1 and 2 scenario. And I'm open to any of those.
Yeah, I mean, and the difference between alternative 1 and 2 is so close that I can absolutely just go 50-50 on it. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Parker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. It's hard to have a strong preference here. Yeah, I think one and 2 are my preferences over the rest of them. I guess I lean towards 2, alternative 2 for the 72 units.
Okay. Okay. So give me just 1 second. I'll just look at this. right. So I guess I would like to suggest we sort of do something in between the two scenarios, since there's sort of, support for 1 and 2. Like if we're going to try to come up with a recommendation that we could take to the commission, would people be open to, like, 'cause option 1 is basically 250 each. If you did something in between the two, it might look something like, we'd obviously have to get a more precise number, but something like 275 to Habitat and 225 to MHO would be the same overall allocation, and sort of falling in between those two scenarios. Parker, is that an approach that you could be supportive of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Me too.
Do we need to tweak the number so that it actually comes out to like a specific number of units and correlates to that, or is it not important and we can just go with the more round number?
We can go with a round number. We can give you a number that's closer to the kind of the unit deliverable, because that's how they operate in the Habitat model. Let's just see. Because at 275, you're going to get roughly 45 units. That's just $50 more than if it was 6110 times. So I think that's a fair, it's an easy and round number to use, if that's the number that you're comfortable with. And in that scenario, it's still resulting in a 69 unit impact between the two, and would move the needle on repair units by 13.8%. And through that fiscal year, we would be at 47% of the goal that's been set in that category. So it would still significantly move that category forward.
All right. Would someone like to make a motion on this? Well, so actually, before we do that, let's plug those numbers in and then kind of look at the overall numbers and kind of remind ourselves where we stand on this. I think. So that would be a total of $3.8 million of recommendations. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is like 83,000 additional dollars that wouldn't be yet allocated under this scenario. One item just before we kind of move on. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about voucher programs and kind of learning about them over the last 6 months or so. There is one program proposed on here that's to promote more utilization of vouchers from the Housing Authority. We also have like a kind of a big proposal related to vouchers that was submitted through ARPA funding. Honestly, I have not had a chance to read it yet. I've heard about it. I've talked to some people about it, but I haven't actually read it. We have like 100 to look at. So I guess I would say, in a way, I kind of like the idea of having a little bit of unallocated funds, because I'd like to study that larger voucher program, and then be able to look at this. We could still look at this project more, kind of understand what everyone's proposing in this space, and if we end up coming back and saying, hey, this is a really good proposal, there'd still be some funds there we could potentially allocate some resources towards it. So in a way, I kind of like the idea that we're not necessarily spending every last penny under this scenario at this time. Mm-hmm. So, Parker, Amanda, any other thoughts about the overall kind of where we stand on these recommendations?
I guess, Brownie, just remind me procedurally, do we need to make a motion on each line item, or
I think we could
spreadsheet, or
we could make one. If we're happy with the way this looks, we could have one motion to approve the set of recommendations to the commission.
Yeah, I guess I would say
we could do it either way, but we don't have to vote on every single one, really.
Yeah, I'm really sympathetic to your point about quantity of ARPA applications we have and the other kind of housing related requests, and kind of waiting to end the difference here. But yeah, I guess I like the idea of stopping, so to speak, where we're at. There's other great things on here that I'd love to fund now, but there's some overlap with ARPA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, then I will move that we approve the allocation of funding as presented. 1 million to the Fairhaven, 1.5 million to the Monticello family, 800,000 to Laurelwood, 275 to Asheville Area Habitat, and 225,000 to Mountain Housing Opportunities, with a remainder of 83,641 to be determined later.
And procedurally, what we would likely do, kind of from a budgetary perspective, is not move the additional program income. So that way you're preserving your general fund transfer, the unallocated, and we'll move a portion of the program income necessary. So it's going to leave that 83,000 in program income there. We do anticipate, based on scheduled payments from program income, another 45,000. So by July 1, around 120,000 in program income would be available to repurpose or allocate, at the discretion of the committee, recommending to the board to do so. So procedurally, that way you're preserving the general fund transfer request at the same level and not leaving unallocated program income in that category. We can just leave it sitting in program income to be reallocated if that is amenable to the committee.
All right, so we have a motion. Parkers, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Amanda, how do you vote?
Aye.
I also vote aye. All right, so these recommendations will go on to the county commission, and if they're approved, these would all be funds that become available in the new fiscal year, right? But it would provide some guidance to the different organizations about the funds that the county is planning to apply to these projects. All right, well, great.
Will this go on our May 3rd agenda?
So this actually travels through the budget process. So this will be one of the attachments to the full budget, the listing of projects. We'll be sharing that with the budget staff after this meeting so that they have that. And it will be part of the overall budget consideration for general fund transfer request.
So unless somebody on the county commission is like, these guys got this all wrong and I've got some different ideas, like basically it would just be voted on as part of the budget unless somebody on the commission feels like they want to spend more time talking about it, or like any of us change our minds. So don't do that. Okay, great. All right, is there anything else that we need to do related to these Affordable Housing Services Program recommendations at this time?
That was it. We are a wrap on this cycle. I know that some of these projects will be considered through the ARPA process as well, and discussion through this committee on that. That completes your task for this cycle.
Okay.
And thanks to the organizations who applied. The applications were really incredible and strong, and to those who continue to come and respond and answer all the questions that we continue throwing at you, thank you so much.
Agreed. And many of them do have ARPA proposals in front of them, so it's really just sort of this part of the work is done, and now we're going to continue to look at these others. What is on our agenda? Do we have a meeting scheduled for May 3rd? I have it on my calendar, but I wasn't sure.
So staff was going to recommend, given the rapid number of meetings we've had and the lack of time in between this and next to prepare additional materials, that we not hold a May meeting. You all have been through many, many meetings, and we appreciate that. But then meeting again at the regular schedule beginning in June, if that is all right with the commission.
I so appreciate that, but here's why I think we may need to possibly have a May 3rd meeting. So the ARPA process is really just starting for phase 2. Right? We got just last week, we got the portal open to look at this 100 or so projects, and most of those are going to be deliberated over a period of at least several months, most likely. And as we did in the first round, the commission, as we diligence these projects, made the allocations over a series of different meetings. Some fairly quickly we identified as projects we wanted to support, made initial allocations, and then took our time to further research and discuss others. I think this process is probably likely to look a lot like that. Not just related to affordable housing. There are a couple of different projects that some commissioners, like in the early childhood education subcommittee, are going to recommend to the commission for making earlier decisions on, including at the May 3rd meeting, because there are certain deadlines and timeframes by which if decisions aren't made, then you basically have to wait a year. So we have a couple of different affordable housing projects that are kind of in a similar situation, mostly due to tax credit related time for deadlines for applications. And so some of those projects are being looked at. We've talked about this before, but and I think that the from the conversations with other commissioners, I think these are all decisions that the commission needs to make, but where possible, I think they would like for our subcommittee to make recommendations or share any feedback we have on these proposals, since we're spending a lot more time digging into these projects, the budgets for the projects and things like that. So it's, I think they've expressed it's very hard to weigh in on specific funding recommendations unless you're, if you're not very familiar with the project. So for that reason, I would suggest we do keep on the calendar a May 3rd meeting for the potential purpose of our committee making some recommendations to the commission related to some of those initial ARPA allocations. And if I could see a scenario where it turns out we don't do it, but I'd at least like to have it on the calendar so that if we need to have that meeting, that we can. I know there's also been, since our last meeting, the staff have come back with answers to some of the questions we asked last week. We're looking at that. So, so that's scheduled for 1 o'clock on the 3rd. So why don't we keep that on the calendar, and then if we need it, we can utilize it to make some recommendations. Some of those would still be going to the commission that day, but I still think there's value in that as opposed to the commission just kind of potentially taking up items without kind of any input from the committee. So is that, Parker, is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's okay with me, Brownie. I guess my only request related to meetings and schedules for staff would be to send out calendar invites, I guess, for all of our future meetings that we know to have on our calendar.
So currently we have the 3rd on the calendar. When was the next scheduled one? I know you just said this, Matt, but when is it after the 3rd?
So it will be the first Tuesday of June.
Of June, okay.
Yeah, so that's your regular meeting schedule is just the first Tuesday of June. We've just been meeting very regularly.
Yeah. Okay, so there's we do May 3rd, then the first one in June would be the next regular one. All right.
And obviously we can do special called meetings. We do them quite a bit lately. So
yeah. And I can see how we'll just have to kind of see how the time frame on the other kind of less time sensitive ARPA applications go. It may be that meeting on June 3rd would be a meeting where we could deliberate further about like the other projects that are there to make recommendations to the commission. If the commission wanted some recommendations sooner, we probably would have to call a special meeting to address it sooner. But all right. So the only other thing I would just kind of add, and this is just sort of for discussion purposes about the that May 3rd meeting. So one of the proposals that came in we talked about at several meetings, the idea of, and which there was a proposal submitted for in the first round of ARPA funding, was the potential use of ARPA funding for land acquisition or land costs related to affordable housing projects. So that's a depending on how much support there is on the commission level, it could be a bigger request. There are a couple of projects where additional land costs are a factor in whether they are going to be viable or could potentially be expanded. So I sent out an email about that this morning. So I know it's just kind of sort of new information, but it's something that could be part of the discussion on the 3rd as well. But it's kind of some ideas that have just come up. So, and it's not on the agenda for today, but I just kind of wanted to ask the commissioners to look at that, and it's something that could be part of what could be discussed on the 3rd. So, Matt, any other business that we gotten to do all of the things on the agenda for today?
that is everything we had.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate all the work the staff put into this, and as Amanda said, to all the groups that put forward great proposals. And these are always difficult decisions, but there's a lot of great work being done here, and we're glad to do what we can to support it. So I think we have completed everything we need to do. So this meeting can be adjourned, and we're starting a special budget work session at 11 o'clock. So
We do have public comment, just in case we have any. Do we have anyone online?
Okay.
That was received prior to the meeting.
No one has their hand raised online.
Okay. Does nobody online, does anybody in the meeting wish to share any comments?
I would just quickly like to say, I'm Cassidy, Asheville Habitat. Thank you so much for your investment in Habitat's work on behalf of our clients, some of the lowest income homeowners. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. We're adjourned.